In 2025, Nike generated $46.3 billion in revenue. It is the most valuable sports brand on earth. Over 1 billion pieces of footwear, apparel, and equipment is sold every single year. And that Nike swoosh is more recognizable in most countries than the cross. And yet, Nike should have never existed. And by the end of this video, you'll understand the exact moment that forced Nike into being and what that moment tells us about how we respond to moments where we often feel stuck. My name is Erik Kruger, by the way. I'm a keynote speaker and author. I work with leaders and teams across the world to help them move more effectively through change and transformation. And this story starts not with a vision, but with a threat. It's January 25th, 1964. Phil Knight and his former track coach, Bill Bowerman, each puts $500 into a new company called Blue Ribbon Sports. And the model was pretty simple. They import running shoes from Japan, they sell them at track meets across the American West, and Knight for a while ran the entire operation from the boot of his car. Now, for 12 years, this company grows really well. They, in the process, secured a distribution deal with a Japanese manufacturer called Onitsuka Tiger, and the relationship was very productive. By the early 1970s, Blue Ribbon Sports had real staff, real retail accounts, and an exclusive agreement to distribute Onitsuka products across the USA. Blue Ribbon Sports had become a real company and have built something pretty substantial. But then, during a routine visit from one of the Onitsuka executives, Knight found some documents that he wasn't actually meant to see. Onitsuka, as it turns out, had been quietly approaching other American distributors behind Phil Knight's back. And this is while their agreement was still active. So when Phil then confronts them, Onitsuka doesn't retreat, but instead they deliver an ultimatum and they say, sell us 51% of Blue Ribbon Sports or we'll just replace you. And so all of a sudden, in that moment, 12 years of work is put at risk. This is a moment that many of us have faced before. You have an idea of how life should unfold and everything seems to be going according to plan. And then all of a sudden, it doesn't. All of a sudden, there are twists and bends, and all of a sudden the future that you had in mind for yourself or for your business is threatened. And let me tell you, how you respond in those moments really matter. One option that you have is to do nothing, which is that you become a victim to the threat. And of course, none of us really want that, but we sometimes choose that option. The alternative is you get to become a threat to the threat. And that is exactly what Phil Knight did. And in doing so, he changed the footwear industry permanently. So Phil Knight refuses Onitsuka's offer, obviously. And then he sits down with his team whose livelihoods depend on this company who's about to lose its only product. And he says to them, well, we are going to have to figure this out. We're going to have to build our own shoe. Now, as it turns out, Jeff Johnson, one of Knight's earliest employees, had been sending him letters full of product ideas and brand concept and marketing angles for many years, letters that Phil Knight often ignored. But the night before Phil decided that we're going to launch this new company and we need a name for this company, Johnson had a dream. And he woke up with a single word that would become the name of the company. And that name and that word was Nike, named for the Greek goddess of victory. So this was adopted with almost no deliberation. The next step was they needed a logo. For that, they turned to Carolyn Davidson, who was a design student at the time, and she designed the little Nike swoosh that we all know so well today. And at the time, they paid her $35 for it. But don't worry, because later on, she was very well compensated for her efforts. So while the legal dispute with Onitsuka is unfolding, Knight secured a new manufacturing arrangement with a Japanese trading company. And while they had that, they still needed a product, and they needed it fast. Now, at the same time, in Bill Bowerman's garage in Eugenie, Oregon, something was already in progress. Because Bowerman had been chasing the same problem for many years. How do you give a runner more grip without adding more weight? And the story sort of goes that one morning after he ate waffles, he looked at the pattern of the waffles and he thought that could be a good pattern for the tread of a shoe. And so he poured liquid rubber into his wife's waffle iron, pressed it shut, and the tread pattern that came out was exactly what he'd been looking for. So the waffle sole was born in his kitchen, and it gave runners better traction and significantly reduced the shoe weight in a way that no other company had really been able to achieve. Over time, it became one of the most replicated designs in athletic footwear history. Nike launched its first shoe at the 1972 US Olympic trials in Eugenie. By 1980, 9 years after the ultimatum that nearly ended everything for them, Nike held 50% of the American athletic shoe market. Knight would later write in his memoir, Shoe Dog, that when you only see problems, you aren't seeing clearly. And one way of interpreting that is that he was writing about how we respond to threats, to challenges, that they can become our leverage for seeing new perspectives and angles, but only if we are able to look beyond those problems and challenges. I wrote a book called Dangerous, and in the book, I write about how do we respond to threats. And really, there are sort of three options available to you. You get the people who completely ignore threats. And of course, this isn't a good strategy because just by ignoring a threat doesn't mean that it goes away. Then you get the people who obsess over their threats. And this can very easily lead to paralysis, that you only see the problem, you only see the challenge, which means it's very difficult for you to move beyond it. And then you get the people who see the opportunity within the threat. They realize that threats and challenges are good things in our lives, that it's an opportunity for personal growth, but also that threats can catalyze action in a way that ambition and vision often can't. What I have seen time and time again is that focused people who are under genuine threat can build things that comfortable people will never build. Often we have to respond not out of ambition, not out of vision, but out of necessity. And that's the exact moment that Phil Knight faced. Someone else made this decision for him. And in being forced out of safety, he built something that safety probably never would have produced. Onitsuka handed him the ultimatum that made Nike inevitable. Onitsuka Tigers still exists today. It is a respected athletic brand operating under the Asics brand. But in the 50 years since they handed Phil Knight that ultimatum, they have not once threatened Nike's position in the market. And it's quite ironic in that way. They gave him a start, they gave him the sort of into the market, but then more importantly, they provided him with an ending that would catalyze something spectacular. The biggest lesson I want you to take away from this is threats and challenges are inevitable. And so my call to action to you is be a threat to the threat.